So I want to react to some statements that Tucker Carlson made. I think the No Kings protest recently makes this a little more clear that there are basically two schools of thought in our nation. One is based on God, respect for neighbor, care for others, hard work, those types of things. Well, the other seems to be based on something much more nefarious, which I would label Marxism, which is a godless form of religion. So it's two religions battling it out in the public square, and one is using violence and other tactics. So Tucker Carlson's remarks, though, recently, I think, really keyed in on what the core issue is, what aligns us. So I'm going to react to this and give my thoughts. I haven't watched the whole clip. I've just seen a part of this to know that I think he has a point somewhere in this clip.
Well, not to be depressing, but here's the truth and something you should keep in mind over the next few years. The United States, two things to keep in mind. The United States is moving, not inexorably, but still moving toward civil war, number one. And
So that's a pretty bold statement. I don't know if I agree with that, because throughout history, things have been dark, and God's grace changes the heart of a nation and unifies it around what is true. But certainly, if things keep going, it does appear to be drifting into two separate directions, and one is fueled by rage and entitlement.
Number two, civil wars are the very worst kind of wars, worse than any kind of war fought against a foreign adversary. So to number one, why is America moving towards civil war? For the same reason all countries that wind up in civil war get there, because the differences between their population, between people within their borders, becomes too great to bear. People decide, I have nothing in common with people who live near me, and I don't want to live near them anymore. In other words, diversity, difference, is actually intolerable to most people. Not necessarily racial diversity, though sometimes that too, but diversity of all kinds. It is not our strength. In fact, it is without question our weakness, and it has always been.
So that's a bold claim, but he's right in the sense that diversity of ideas, diversity of worldview, diversity of backgrounds, ethnicity, abilities, skills, those things can be good. But the idea that being diverse and that all ideas are equal is a lie straight from hell. Those that worship God must worship him in spirit and truth. The Bible is very much concerned with truth. And when you negate the standard of truth, or that truth even exists as a possibility, and where basic things are denied, and you're expected to believe those lies, you're going to end up with a culture that can't function, because it's based on insanity. It's based on contradictions. And even God cannot understand a contradiction. To contradict is to speak against. And in the garden in Genesis 3, Satan said, did God really say? And that's been the lie ever since. Is the Bible really true? Is the word of God true? Can we know God? Yes, of course we can. Of course the Bible is true, not because it claims to be true, but because it is from God. Books can claim to be true and not be true. That happens all the time. But because the author of the Bible is the Holy Spirit, it is different. It is set apart. It is what we would call holy and should be obeyed and listened to. Why? Why? Is there some sort of internal evidence? Well, of course, you could go to apologists and people like that would use evidential apologetics in order to demonstrate that claim. You've got historical claims, you've got prophecy, things of that nature, but false books make those claims as well, so they're really not compelling. The issue at the ultimate level is a spiritual blindness to truth, a spiritual blindness to reality, to the extent with which even someone like Tucker Carlson over the past few years, we've seen a progression. I'm not saying put your hope in Tucker Carlson, but where he's started to talk about Jesus and had some sort of spiritual experience with some sort of demonic thing, if you guys remember that. And it's very interesting to see that chasm between reality and what most people are now protesting on this day of no kings, which of course we don't have a king, you guys. And the whole idea for the formation of our country was that they wanted to be free from Anglican coercion, and that the king was sovereign over the church. They wanted freedom to worship God in truth and be able to run their lives. It was about freedom of worship. And what we see in our day, ironically, is actually a freedom of self-love. And it's just a continuation of the hippies 2.0 and free from God, communism, those types of things. It's what we're seeing in our day. But, you know, I think Tucker's got some good points.
If you have nothing in common with your wife, do you have a stronger marriage? No, of course your marriage falls apart. And the same is true for countries. And the truth about the United States is that on every level, beginning with a demographic level, the American population has less in common with itself, with one another, than ever before. When I was born, which wasn't that long ago, it was the modern era. It was air travel and air conditioning, electricity. When I was born, the United States was about 90% white Christian. It's now less than 40% white Christian. Now, you may think that's a good thing.
I don't know where he gets that stat from, but if that is accurate, that is a huge shift. That's like looking at the heart of a nation and saying, hey, we're going to totally change and expect it to be able to operate under the principles that it was functioning under. Any family, if you just break it down to a group of friends or a family, you bring in all bunch of new friends into that group and totally change it, it's not going to operate the same way, or school or business or company. And again, that would be almost insurmountable. And I think a lot of that has to do with social media and the way that kids are being influenced and affected, that there's no foundation in the law of God, there's no fear of God, and there's no basic common understanding. See, we have God's common grace, which allows people to function in society. But when you remove that law and that fear of God and basic moral rights and an agreed upon kind of what they would call a social contract, where we agree to these ideas, you don't have to follow Jesus. I would recommend it, but we're going to kind of prescribe these morals, and this is what we will operate by. That's kind of how a legal system works and must work. But when you start to question the meaning of words and the way the Constitution can be understood and applied and make it all kind of on a kind of a living document and kind of manipulate it, that's what liberals always do, because the meaning is always the words. Did God really say? Can we really know? And of course, the answer is yes. And of course, they'll say, no, you can't.
But it's a massive change, an unprecedented change, really, in a very short period of time. Of course, it's not accidental or organic. That was the result of policies put in place to achieve that result, and they did. There are people who didn't want a majority white Christian country. Okay, they got what they wanted. But what do they have? They have a country with no majority demographically at all. There is no American majority, which is to say 51% of people who have something very basic in common. And so what you have is an inherently fractured country. Languages, religions, ethnicities, backgrounds, beliefs, too innumerable to catalog. And so a country like that, unless unified by something, will split apart, particularly when that country is the size of a continent and is held together by a pretty fragile web of infrastructure, air routes and highways. And
So Tucker's point that the country is fractured and falling apart because 51% of people agree on common reality is true. And you're seeing that because even in the No Kings contest, whatever that was, it was kind of a contest for who could wear the stupidest thing into public. But there's no real point. There's no real principles behind it. It's just people raging against God. And Ken Ham did a video on this. Is it really a protest of a monarch? No, because we don't have a monarch. It's obvious that we don't. And enforcing the law, enforcing things is very important. Now, it might not be being done in the best way possible. I don't know. You can get sources on how it's being done and find examples I'm sure that everyone would disagree with. But the fact that the law should be upheld and that people here illegally and trying to kind of influence future elections and things like that is you can't have a nation without borders. You have to have a process to protect your citizens, and that's really the role of Romans 13, to protect the citizens and execute justice and uphold morality. Again, I don't think you can have a solid government without a basic understanding of biblical morality, because apart from that, you're just making up whatever people want, and you end up with what we're seeing, abortion on demand. You're ending up with the gender confusion things. You're ending up with all sorts of insanity, and ultimately it's an attack on the family. So if you don't have a common view of morality, a common view of law, a common view of your purpose here, it's not possible to continue without serious problems. And because it's a spiritual issue, one side is clearly bent on destruction.
Unless you're very self-conscious about keeping it together physically, but also spiritually, explaining to people why they should have any regard at all, much less any obligation to people in, say, the next town, much less the next state. Unless you do that self-consciously, unless you inculcate a sense of national identity, it will by nature fall apart. That is a
And that's a good point, because when you're a naturalist and you believe everything's material and there is no spiritual, you actually fail to be able to govern people, because people are by nature dichotomous. They're basically material and spiritual. And when you negate that, you end up with exactly the problems we're seeing, which is really self-love. It's really antichrist. It's really a form of religion where man becomes God. But the way you get there is by denying spiritual realities, and then ultimately those come back and deny physical realities, which is what we're seeing.
physics principle, entropy. It'll blow up unless you hold it together. And this has been an untended garden for decades. Decades. Nobody in charge of the United States over the past, say, 40 years has really tried to articulate why all of us should live together on the same continent.
I don't know about Reagan, but if you've seen that movie, I would recommend it. They called him the the Russians had a name for him. They called him, oh man, he was basically, they called him a Christian, and I'm trying to think of what they called him. But either way, it was his whole mission. He saw the effects of communism being godless and trying to undermine biblical and national unity and identity, and he fought against it. So I'd recommend that movie, Reagan. And yeah, they had a very cool name for him. You'll have to check out them, because right now it's escaping me. But basically, they've been trying this play since Reagan, and I think he had a good understanding of that from what I have seen.
Continent. There's kind of been an unspoken ethos of America, a kind of gay rights technocracy, globo homo. We're all kind of cool with, lifestyles. Impulsive, but even if you like it, it's not enough to hold people together who don't have common beliefs, backgrounds, languages, religions. It's just not. It's pathetic. It's rich people politics. It doesn't actually mean anything. It's just an adornment. It's political jewelry. It's a bump sticker. It's not a national identity, and it's not enough to hold your country together. And that's why ours is coming apart, because people don't have enough in common. So what would happen if it came apart? What would happen if there were a civil war? Well, the first thing to know is it would be incredibly violent, because wars are by nature violent, and civil wars especially so. Violent. And you do hear from time to time people on both sides, particularly on the left, but not only on the left, say, well, I'm just sick of it. I'm just sick of it. I'm ready for the fight. People that have never seen what that looks like, anyone who has seen what that looks like, approaches the entire topic with care and respect, because it's incredibly ugly and its effects are generational. And if you don't believe it, consider our own Civil War, which ended 160 years ago in 1865, and we're still fighting it. We're still arguing over the names of Confederate generals, tearing down their statues, renaming military bases, stereotyping people in the South. That war is still ongoing on some level. It's not a hot war, but it's very much a Cold War and has been for 160 years. Go to Spain. Their civil war ended in, 1939. They're still arguing about it. They're still passing legislation about it. The wounds left by civil wars do not heal quickly. They last for, hundreds of years, and they completely remake the country, usually for the worse. So disunity is easy. Rebuilding into a single country after a civil war is very, very hard, and sometimes it never even works. There are civil wars in effect ongoing on this planet right now for hundreds of years, and they probably will never be resolved, because the people fighting each other within national borders don't have anything in common. That's the truth. So if you want to prevent a civil war, figure out what everybody, or at least the bulk of the people in your nation, have in common, and emphasize that. And so what would that be in our case? Hard to know. In fact, at this stage, really the only realistic hope for national unity is spiritual revival. Is a place where most Americans wake up to realize that God exists and created every single person in the United States of America. And that's what we have in common, our humanity. Not because our common humanity is meaningful by itself, but because our common humanity comes from God. And as that, well, they hesitate.
And that's the core issue. Also, they called him the Crusader. That's what they called Reagan, the Crusader. But that's the issue. Unless you have a basic common understanding, and if you look at our founding documents, it says all people are endowed by their creator with unalienable rights. In other words, because rights come from God, despite what people can't handle. I don't know why that's shocking. Morality comes from God. Truth comes from God. These were basic principles throughout the majority time of history. But even in our nation, that was in our founding documents. Unless you affirm that, you can't function in a society based on that. And you can't function in a free society by any means, because people are enslaved to sin. So, in summary here, I don't know what's going to happen or what's next. It's not a call for us overreacting. As Christians, our hope is in Jesus, and he will cause all things to work for good for those who are called according to his purposes. But it doesn't mean we should be passive right now. Now is a time to pray. It's to do evangelism, to make disciples, to recognize that politics certainly have a huge effect on people around us and on the direction of our cities and our churches and the nation. And it matters. I mean, think about it. Why are people wearing frog suits to protest no king? Like, it's a form of mental insanity that we're seeing in front of us. And it's because they're given over to worship creation rather than the creator. It's Romans 1. And in the book of Judges, which is also perhaps a good topic for this day, when there's no king in the land, everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And when you reject that Jesus is king, the true king of kings, and operate under your own ethical hierarchy, which is just made up nonsense, it literally is nonsense, you get a bunch of rage-filled warriors that just go around and blow stuff up and do crazy things. And I'm not calling for violence, obviously, but these people, that's what they're doing. That's what they're doing. That's kind of their whole MO, is to just tear down. And what no one really has been able to answer, and a question most people were asking right away, was what is the solution that you have if you're on the other side of this? If you're looking at the current state of our country after having years of a guy that wasn't even cognizant to be able to function, passing laws, putting people in houses, trying to prosecute churches, trying to get half of America fired for not taking. If you remember the insanity that we've been, I don't know why these people don't remember any of that. And then they're out, just trying to destroy and tear down. And so it is becoming a chasm in our nation. Which side will you stand for? And I think this is one of those rare times where it does apply to say, as for me and my house will serve the Lord. You have to decide, what direction are you going to go? Who's driving the bus? And ultimately, the people that disagree with us are not directly our enemies. We're supposed to pray for our enemies and be kind. And we want to see people saved into God's kingdom, because but by the grace of God, that would be us. And the gospel is the power of God for salvation. The gospel is the power of God to change rebels. And Dr. Carlson's right. Without any sort of unifying ideology here, there is no future for any nation, and Abraham Lincoln said that during the Gettysburg Address. He said, whether this nation or any nation could survive, we need to turn to God. We need a right understanding of people. And whatever your understanding, there's so many different motives for the Civil War. People would say it was fiscal. It was based on money alone. It wasn't really based on human dignity. Maybe not. But with Wilberforce, you saw that it was very much a biblical issue. And he wanted to glorify God and abolish the slave trade. And here in our nation, a lot of people died so that we could have an equality, humanly speaking, of opportunity, not of outcome, though. That's theft, and that's something entirely different, and is very self-righteous. So the issue is going to be the authority of the Bible, expositional preaching, attendance in churches, family worship. Those types of things are really the remedy for the day, and of course, evangelism. So let me know what you think. If you're still watching it, take a moment, hammer that like button, and thank you so much, and God bless.